and the Beast is often looked at as one of the great pinnacles of Disney's success. One of their most successful and popular films of all time, earning great acclaim both critically and with audiences. With a critical score of 93% approval, and an audience score of 92% approval respectively, it's clear that it was pretty popular, and on top of that it grossed $424 million off a budget of $25 million, and this was in the early 90s, so that means a lot. So it was an astounding and overwhelming success by every single metric, and it really did have everything. At the time, it had a really high standard of animation, really beautiful designs, colourful and exciting. It has a really solid and engaging storyline, great dialogue, a really powerful screenplay, fun characters that are well voiced by good actors, and above all, just so many classic musical numbers. Man, early Renaissance Disney just hits different, and Beauty and the Beast is the epitome of this. We have Belle, Gaston, Be Our Guest, the mob song, Beauty and the Beast, Something There, absolute bangers one and all. Hell, I'm pretty sure this is one of the rare animated films that got the nod for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Not many can say that. So yeah, the film's straight fire. The scene where Belle and Beast dance in the ballroom is one of Disney's most iconic scenes ever, and it just permeated pop culture and the collective public consciousness in a way not often seen before or since. In my eyes, this was the film that kickstarted the renaissance of Disney in the 90s. Like, yes, The Little Mermaid, it opened the door, but Beauty and the Beast proved it was a new trend, it was not a fluke. And so over the decades, it's remained massively popular. Even 30 years on, Belle in particular is one of Disney's most popular characters, and it spawned a remake in 2017, at the peak of Disney's obsession with these live-action remakes. Like, they're still being made now, but it felt different back then. It felt like they cared a lot more. Can't explain it, but it felt different. And this sequel, it went very well. Whilst the reviews perhaps were not as raving compared to the OG, it still got good ones. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 71% and an 80% from critics and audiences respectively. And that's by no means bad. Honestly, this is one of those films where the discourse you see online is clearly a bit out of touch with the common man. Judging by the comments you often see about it, you'd think this is the worst film ever made, but it's very popular. And so it's clear the overarching opinion on the remake, just the quiet one, is that the film slaps overall. And on top of that, it made a cool $1.2 billion, so it's clear that even 25 years on from the film's release, the franchise name brand still had extreme power. That's what drew people to this. And only The Lion King's remake has made more money. And yeah, that power probably lingers on 7 or so years on from the remake. There's no reason for it to dwindle anytime soon. So I get that this was probably a pretty long-winded introduction, but it was needed to show that this was always a massively popular and important film in Disney's history. Twice over. What a timeless story. Or rather, what was once considered a timeless story, because recently there's been a bit of discourse. And by recently, we're talking like the last decade or so. And particularly surrounding the release of the remake. And this discourse discusses the relationship between Belle and Beast, with some big calls being thrown around. The first is that the whole thing is disgusting, because it's pretty much Stockholm Syndrome in action, and then is also just massively toxic and thus not something that should be held up as ideal. It shouldn't be considered goals or whatever you want, pretty much stating that Belle's character and position, as a bit of a proto-feminist figure, has been ruined by marrying an abusive prince who mistreated her so horribly. And I'll be honest, I've never really thought that deeply about Beauty and the Beast. I watched it, but I moved on with my life. But today, I figured why not? Why not wade into this and see what I think about the whole deal? And for starters, I figured we should just start with the whole Stockholm Syndrome thing. Okay, so before we go any further, we're using animation for this. So we're not really going to talk about the remake because it's ultimately derivative of the original. And from what I understand, they actively tried to lessen those elements anyway. So I want to see if it was really that bad to begin with. For those of you that don't know what it is, I'm going to be very basic and just quote Wikipedia for you. Stockholm Syndrome is the proposed condition or theory that tries to explain why hostages sometimes develop a psychological bond with their captors. It's supposed to result from a specific set of circumstances, namely the power imbalance in hostage-taking, kidnapping, and abusive relationships. That being said, there are 4 key components that categorize this condition. 1, there must be a hostage's development of positive feelings towards the captor. 2, there must be no previous relationship between hostage and captor. 3, there must be a refusal by hostages to cooperate with police or other government authorities. And 4, there must be a hostage's belief in the humanity of the captor, ceasing to perceive them as a threat when the victim holds the same values as the aggressor. But then here's the rub. Stockholm Syndrome is apparently exceedingly rare. According to the FBI, I know, using the FBI as my source, but still, less than 8% of hostages show any real evidence of the syndrome. So because of this, it makes it pretty hard to analyze any trends in the data. And on top of that, there's a significant debate as to whether this syndrome even exists at all. But regardless of whether you think it's legit or not, or whether you think it's just a bunch of bullshit or simply a permeation of a different branch of a psychological disorder like PTSD, like some academics do, I think we all realize that when people say she has Stockholm Syndrome, they're not really diving into the specifics of it, but are more saying she's been brainwashed and thus she wouldn't act that way normally. So let's assume that this condition is the real deal for a minute and not a bunch of BS, which I kind of think it might be, but not saying it is. It's just not exactly proven as of right now. Okay, so I think just in general, we can rule out the idea of this being some sort of brainwashing, because for starters, she's only really captive for an evening in which she interacts with him like twice. She swaps with her dad, she refuses dinner, and then she sneaks out that night and meets the servants, goes into the West Wing, and he yells at her to leave. She leaves, gets attacked by wolves, and he appears, probably having used the mirror to find her, and saves her. He gets wounded, she does not have to stay, she can leave him there to die if she wants. She has her horse, but she doesn't. She helps him, and even then, she could have just dropped him off and fled once more, but she stays and helps him heal. So, I just don't think there'd been enough time or interaction to be Stockholmed here, and yet she does go back with him. And then from then on, I don't think it's really that much captivity. Hell, literally after like another day or so, she's allowed to leave to go help her dad. So I just don't think this fits Stockholm Syndrome at all. She isn't much of a prisoner, and she just hangs out for max a couple of days, and then he lets her leave again. So not really sure how you can even arrive at this being some sort of sick captive fantasy. And yeah, she helps him fend off the townsfolk, aka the local law enforcement, but they're a lynch mob out to kill him just for existing. He didn't do anything wrong. Like, what is she supposed to do? Just stand by while he's brutally murdered for no reason by these crazy peasants? Nah. In my eyes, we can cross off this idea that their whole relationship is some pseudo Stockholm Syndrome creep fest. I just don't think it is. But that doesn't mean it isn't toxic. And by toxic, we're talking abusive, right? Like, you know what I mean. So I decided to watch through their interactions to see if it is much of a toxic relationship. And watch through, I mean just watch through the whole film because it's a classic and I wanted to, so there. So I took a look. And it starts pretty bad. He imprisons her dad, and when she comes to save him, he gives her a choice. One of them has to stay in the palace forever, either her or her dad. And she, of course, sacrifices herself. And yeah, I'll admit that's pretty bad, but he does give her a nice comfy room and offers her dinner. That's good. And then he goes mental when she doesn't come out for dinner and says if she doesn't eat with him, she doesn't eat at all. That's pushy, creepy, cruel, and abusive. That's no good. No good at all. And then she goes exploring the West Wing, which, yeah, he said the West Wing is forbidden, so she shouldn't have gone in there. But he does freak out and screams at her to leave, so she runs off into the snow and is almost killed by wolves. But he saves her, he's badly hurt, she saves him, yada yada. This all happens in the span of a couple of hours if you look at the timeline. And then from literally that point onwards, she's a prisoner on paper. On paper. She could have left. She didn't. And then she spends more time with him over the course of what, a day, a few days? They play in the snow, look at books, have breakfast, dance in the ballroom. And then he straight up lets her leave when he sees her dad in trouble with the mirror. Like, is this actually an abusive deal? Like, yeah, it's harsh justice having her under house arrest on her father's behalf to begin with. But you tried trespassing in a royal palace in the 1700s and see what happens. So is it legit toxic? Everybody has some rocky times, right? But his lasts the course of what, a day? He's only mean to her for that first encounter. Well, the first two encounters, and then for the rest of the time, he's trying his best to improve and impress her with his manners and charm. Like, seriously, he yells at her 3 times, and as soon as she gets back from saving him from the wolves, he's all good, he's trying his best, he's very sweet and kind. The only toxic element I see here that's not really addressed, because let's be real, they address him being a douchebag in the movie itself, is that this dude is severely traumatized from being forced to live as a beast since he was a child, and thus is probably emotionally stunted. Hell, see the way he snaps to attention when he's being scolded by Belle or Mrs. Potts? Dude craves being scolded by Nanny. He's a true aristocrat.
A good dressing down from Nanny is what they most want in life.
And see how he's all smiley being taught life lessons by Lumiere and Cogsworth about how to woo Belle and impress her? He's like a little kid there. Or the way he eats like an overzealous 3-year-old, or the way he interacts with the birds like a little boy. Or how he chases Belle in the snow. Only time I've ever seen somebody run like that was when I was in kindergarten, so...
They're the same picture.
You know, maybe the guy's going to end up depending on her more like a parental figure than a true romantic partner. And that's kind of whack. But even then, it doesn't always feel like that in the film itself. And so, I just think that any sort of complaint about the romantic dynamic here is wildly overblown. Don't get me wrong, I clowned on it when I was younger too, but as a joke, because back then it was a joke. Everyone was just joking about it. But then people seem to start to take it seriously, which is insane to me because even within the Disney catalog itself, this is not even sniffing the top tier of problematic or degrading romantic storylines. Sorry, it just ain't. And so, well, so there. Maybe you disagree and that's fine, and you do you. Because after all, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about the romantic storyline of Beauty and the Beast? Do you think it's problematic or otherwise toxic, or Maybe you have an opinion that more lines up with me. I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.